Hello, and welcome to UK Paranormal Files. In today's episode, we are going to look at sightings from within the UK of the creature known by various names, such as the Dogman, the Wolfman, or if you prefer, the Werewolf. Wolfman sightings in the UK and Ireland date back to at least the 1st century, and probably there were sightings and encounters from these shores that predate history. It is one of the monsters we learn about when growing up. It has penetrated the common culture of these islands, and the legend evolves as needed and returns to prominence from time to time. The legend of a cursed therianthropic hybrid wolf-human is old and well-travelled. We associate this creature with myths, books, TV and movies, and yet it probably wouldn't surprise you if I were to say that all around the world, new sightings are registered from people from all walks of life who are claiming to have seen them. Often they are described as having either a dog or wolf-like face and snout, canine legs, and are said to be able to move as easily on 2 legs as 4. Some reports tell of human-like bodies and occasionally human eyes and limbs. Other reports cite similar characteristics, but estimate the size to be closer to that of a horse or a cow. Now I'll admit, these sightings are not 10 a penny. They are certainly less frequent than UFO or Bigfoot encounters, but recorded sightings do exist, and as acceptance of the paranormal continues to grow, perhaps in part thanks to the continued sharing of ideas and experiences over the internet, more and more reports continue to be lodged. Despite this, and as we'll hear a little later, I think it's safe to assume that, for a variety of reasons, not everyone who has ever seen one of these creatures has taken the additional step of registering it. For those of you who are familiar with my channel, you will know that in my traditional deep dive episodes, I like to examine a single case per episode, and then recap the talking points, examine the evidence, and offer my own summary. But on this particular topic, it's going to be difficult to do precisely that, because of the very nature of the subject at hand. In the rare examples of cases being logged, the reports usually come in some time after the incident took place. Plus, there are very few people dedicated to researching and validating such cases in the world, and they can't cover everywhere and check up on every sighting. We are indebted that these accounts have been recorded at all, and in this episode, we're going to take a look at 4 separate eyewitness accounts which have been recorded from the UK. Before we get to those accounts, and for the benefit of anyone not familiar with the general zoological makeup of the UK, it should be known that we do not have wild populations of wolves, nor bears, and have not done so for a long time. There are some who are calling for the reintroduction of wolves to the UK as a means of controlling deer population, but as of yet, so far as I can tell, none have been officially released. Mostly this is under the protest of sheep farmers at the suggestion. And if the recent reintroduction of wild boar is a comparable case, then their mass migration and uncontrolled reproduction might well be good reason to give pause and reconsider reintroducing any additional species to the UK. We do have foxes in the UK, but they generally do not grow to a size that would be confused with a wolf or even a large dog. They are usually distinct in colour, and thanks to their bushy tail and distinctive snout, are easily identifiable. Anyway, our first 2 accounts come from Wales, which has a long history of Wolfman sightings. These accounts come via Deborah Hatswell, with whom they were originally submitted. Deborah is an indefatigable researcher who is well known within the UK Bigfoot and Wildman community. Deborah is a lead member of the British Bigfoot Research Group and regularly vlogs about UK cryptid reports on her excellent channel called dhatswell #BBRUK Creature Reports #BBR. I'll leave a link to Deborah's channel and to these reports which were recorded on her blog in the description below, and I thank Deborah for granting permission so that I may share these accounts here on UK Paranormal Files. I saw something when I was younger. Here is my story. I was about 19 and me and my girlfriend and my 3 best pals went camping in the Black Mountains in Wales. We went to the local pub, had a few and drove back to our campsite in the middle of nowhere in a glade surrounded by woods. Myself and my girlfriend had one tent, my pals had another, and upon settling down for the night, I found out I had no smokes. So I made up a tale that someone was outside our tents. One of my brave pals got out of his tent and had a look around, and while he was up I asked for a pack of smokes. My pals then realised my ruse and entered my tent and duffed me up. About an hour or so later, my girlfriend woke me up saying, "Someone is outside." Thinking it was my pals getting back at me, I shouted out, "I know it is one of you." But each one answered from their tent, "Nope, it's not us." So I grabbed my torch and left the tent. It was pitch black. I heard something make a run for it as I left the tent and scanned the tree line with my torch. As the beam went from the left to right, it passed a shadow which was human-shaped, but its eyes reflected like a cat, but red. As I shone my torch at it, I saw the humanoid figure run through the woods, but on all fours. I screamed and told my mates and girlfriend, but they thought I was again taking the mickey. When my torch first hit the creature, it was on 2 legs, but then when my torch went back to it, it was on all fours running away through the trees. I still have this image in my mind, and it was a werewolf. If we stay in Wales, there is a second account that was reported to Deborah from an individual called Tam Dudgeon. The incident likely occurred in 2006 and was recorded by Tam in 2016. I'd been selected to appear on a well-known television game show here in the UK, and one of the researchers was doing some background bio work on me, and I mentioned my interest in Bigfoot and cryptoids. You could hear in her voice that she thought it was a bit of a joke when she asked me what we were looking for. I was telling her all about different sightings and creatures, and I mentioned the Dogman. Then the line went silent. I thought we had been cut off, or I had scared her off completely, but she was still there, and when she spoke you could hear that she was shook up. She said, "I had been trekking up around Mount Snowdon and had seen a large figure. It was over 6 foot and standing up. It was a man who looked like a dog. It leapt over a fence from a standing start and disappeared." She explained to Tam that she hadn't told anybody in 10 years in case they laughed at her. What I find interesting about this story is the random nature of it, being provided via an innocuous conversation by someone who seems very clear in what they saw, but for fear of ridicule or social disinclusion chose to stay silent. And yet, at presumably the first instance of a friendly ear from a stranger, she shared her encounter story 10 years later. Our next 2 accounts come via Linda Godfrey, who is one of America's foremost authorities on modern-day monsters and cryptids. Linda has written numerous books, and her latest, I Know What I Saw, would be an apt title for this episode. Linda has graciously agreed that I may recount 2 encounters which were reported to her from witnesses in the UK. These encounters are written up on her blog, and I shall leave links to those and her new book in the description below this video. This 3rd account took place on the 9th of October in 1996, although it was 20 years before the witness would report the case to Linda. The man, who asked to be referred to as Gary, was 26 at the time and was on his way to meet a friend who lived on Underhill Road in southeast London. In order to walk there, Gary had to make a long trek heading southwest past Camberwell New Cemetery and then down the entire length of Brenchley Gardens. He decided to cut through the older cemetery to save 20 minutes of walking time, even though it was already dark, and the idea of walking through the cemetery at night was freakishly scary to him. He said he normally rode his bicycle to his friend's house, but their plans for that evening precluded his usual means of transport. He didn't have a flashlight and the cemetery had no lighting system, so he could only see a few feet ahead of him as he made his way across the grounds. He was well into the middle of the graveyard when the movement of something very large and dark caught his eye. I swear I saw what I thought was a dog. A big dog move very quickly, he said. He stopped and squinted into the darkness, but decided his mind was playing tricks on him and started off again. He did not get very far. It was then in a flash my life changed forever, wrote Gary. It was so quick that I never had a chance. I thought that somebody had literally run into me and knocked me over. Something had grabbed me by my arm very tightly and smashed me to the ground. It was big, it was powerful, and it had extremely bad breath, and it smelt cold and awful. This thing was now bearing down on me, looking directly at my face, dribbling onto me and growling. But it was the creature's next action that truly frightened me. It began to eagerly sniff my body up and down. I was convinced I was going to die. I'm afraid to say that as brave as I think I might be, I was not at this point, and shamefully I soiled myself. As I lay there being smelled, I was waiting for the bite, but that never happened. Just as quick as it started, it was over, and the beast was gone and sprinted off in a flash. It sprinted away on its hind legs. The fact that the beast ran off just as the witness felt he was about to be killed conforms with the overwhelming majority of Dogman reports Linda has received over the years, but only a small handful of those reports have involved any physical contact. Gary added that he had a theory about the dog's extremely close examination of his body. He suffers from an illness that happens to be one of the many diseases which dogs can smell in humans. I truly believe that it was this that the creature could smell on me, he said. I think if I did not suffer from this, I would now be dead. I know some animals can smell sickness, and I'm sure they wouldn't eat anything infected if they could help it. Maybe it had no intention of eating me at all. Maybe I was in its territory, and it was just scaring me to say keep out. But there was another weird aspect of the creature that Gary has never been able to shake off. The hand. Since he and the creature were very close and face to face, he had quite a good look at it despite the low level of light. Its fur was a dark colour. The head reminded Gary of a German Shepherd, but its body was more the size and musculature of a Great Dane. He couldn't see its eyes very well, as they evidenced no eye shine or glow. It did growl in a low tone as it smelled him in what he described as deep nasal sniffs. The creature's breath was like rotten fish, but with a weird sweetness to it. When Linda asked Gary how it held him by the arm, he said it was not with a paw. When it grabbed me, it was a hand that grabbed me, a big hand, human-like. Its whole hand went around my arm in a vice-like grip. I will argue until the day I die, it was a hand that grabbed me. I don't care who thinks that's mad. It seemed to me that it had long nails. If they were sharp, I can't confirm, but they were long and claw-like. If you had to grow nails to a similar length, they would protrude 5 to 6 inches from your hand with a slight inward curvature. Linda asked Gary whether the long claws tore any of his clothing, and he said he was wearing a motorcycle jacket that was open, so he only had one small tear on the front of his t-shirt. The incident was not something that Gary was able to just brush off. He had something like post-traumatic stress disorder that caused him to take 6 months off work. He is still terrified of woodlands and the dark. Strangely, the incident also made him afraid of fog, although he says there was none in the cemetery that night. Gary provided a sketch of the being. He says he had to stop every now and then when drawing it, as it was causing him to have flashbacks. He said he has never told anyone but his wife about the incident, and that he only wrote to Linda because his wife had encouraged him to do so to get it off his chest and to lay the demons to rest. He also has not set foot in that cemetery since. Part of me wants to be rational and say it was a strong man in a costume, but that's my mind wanting to say, stop being stupid. But if that's the case, it was the best costume I've ever seen. It must have been worn by an Olympic athlete due to the speed and strength. He also felt strongly that the creature possessed a keen intellect as it interacted with him. This is a quite terrifying encounter, and I'm not so certain I can claim that I would not have had a similar response to being so directly assaulted by a wolf or dog-like creature in the dark, in the ominous surroundings of a pitch-black cemetery at night. It is curious that this account takes place in urban London, which seems the most improbable location for a wolf-like creature to be inhabiting. The fact that the creature had hands and fled on its hind legs seems to rule out this being an escaped dog. But perhaps if this is a true werewolf that had turned, maybe the victim of the curse just happened to be in London on that particular day and involuntarily converted to its wild state, and the cemetery seemed like a dark and quiet place to lurk until morning. Our final witness account comes again courtesy of Linda and occurred in late summer of 1989 in the northeast of England. It was reported under the condition of anonymity. My friend Sean and I were out driving around the local towns and villages, playing some tunes on the cassette and generally just cruising about. It must have been late because it was dark by the time we passed through the small coastal village of Cresswell, so I'm assuming it was around 11 PM. I remember we were heading southwest from Cresswell to Ellington on the Cresswell Road, having just passed the entrance to the caravan site on our left. I had not yet had the opportunity to test the extra fog lights on the front of the new vehicle, and I wanted to see how bright they were in the dark. Sean was looking in the glove compartment for a different cassette, and I told him I was going to switch the fogs on. We were coming up to a slight right-hand bend. There was a 6-foot wall with dense foliage on our left and a normal hedgerow bordering a field to our right. It was then I saw something run out in the middle of the road. I wasn't going very fast, probably 30 miles per hour maximum, and had ample time to slow down so as not to hit it, even to stop, but I'm not sure I did. I think I just crawled the car towards it, as I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It had run out onto the road from my right and had stopped in the middle of the road and was looking directly at the car. It was covered in thick, mousy grey-brown fur, about 2 to 3 inches long, and stood on its rear legs, which were jointed with the knee at the rear like a horse or a dog's. Its upper arms were down by its side, and it held its forearms out in front of it, with its hands and long fingers hung down at the wrist. They may have been long hands or long fingers, but I remember the hands from the wrist to the fingers as being very long. It had one foot in front of the other, as if in mid-step, as it seemed I had caught it by surprise, and while its body was still facing in the direction it was travelling, the head was facing the car. I remember the eyes, which reflected the light back at me as being perfectly round and a green-yellow colour, much like that of a cat's eye when caught in the light. It stood about 5 to 6 foot tall, but was hunched over. Even then, I'd say it wouldn't have been over 6 foot tall stood erect. It had what seemed to be a very muscular body, not big or bulky, more wiry with powerful limbs, a thick chest and a small waist. It had a short tail, maybe 4 to 5 inches long, definitely not as long as most dogs. Personally, I'd describe it as more like a goat's tail. After seeing this, I mainly searched for sightings of satyrs in the region, as this was the closest thing I could relate it to. Its head and face were like that of a dog or goat, as in, not flat like a human's face, but with a muzzle and quite large ears. I do not remember seeing any teeth, and it did not have horns. The whole encounter could not have lasted more than a few seconds. I assume it regained its composure after being caught off guard as it took off over the 6-foot wall and through the foliage atop that in a single bound. Although I often drive by the same area, I have never seen it again. As for how I felt, I was in shock at first, like when someone gives you a fright. I shouted, "Sean, Sean," to make sure he was looking, as he was fishing around in the glove box for a tape. I just couldn't take it all in. After it had gone, we were still going slow. We were looking back to where it had disappeared, and I felt terrified. I've always considered myself a fairly macho type and not easily scared, but there was no chance of me getting out of that car to follow it. Oh, and I forgot to mention that neither myself nor Sean was under the influence of alcohol or drugs. It's very hard to talk about, as quite frankly, most people don't believe it. I wasn't sure if you would, or even do, as I imagine you must get a few folks who try and pull your leg. But hand on heart, all I have said is true to the very best of my knowledge. I want you to know that. I can't tell you how excited I was when I found out someone else had seen it, and I could actually put a name to the creature. Again, in his final account, we have a sighting which has been retold after an elapse of time. It is clear that the sighting had a profound effect on this individual and is etched into his memory banks. This individual, by his own words, considered himself as macho and not easily scared, but whatever he saw on the road that night clearly terrifies him. It is also somewhat impressive that he was able to recall and deliver a fairly detailed description about the creature's physical appearance. Stories of lycanthropic creatures are rooted in folklore from all around the world. There are legends of humanoids with the ability to shapeshift into wolf form at will. There are stories of such an ability being an affliction and the result of some kind of curse or magic, perhaps as the result of a bite or a scratch from another one of these beings. And there are theories that these are flesh and blood natural creatures roaming the wilderness. They are exceptionally adept at avoiding all but the most occasional interaction with humans. I suspect that for those of you out there who can allow for the possibility of such creatures to exist, you might find yourself categorising these sightings into one of the above, or a similar categorisation. After reading numerous accounts, I think that each general theory has some merit, and I'm not so sure that when you look back over the 4 eyewitness reports that we have looked at in this video, that it becomes any easier to tuck these neatly into just one specific category or another. What is not in doubt is that these witnesses are seeing something. Of its true nature and origins we are left to speculate, but it's clear that this is not a new mystery. When most of us first encounter this, and by this I mean reconciling in our minds the reality of modern day actual Dogman and Wolfman sightings from all over the world as a paranormal conundrum and as something to be given real consideration, it seems to me, like most of us, we start out by thinking there must be some level of superficialness to the reports. Initial assumptions when approaching this might be to dismiss encounters as misidentification, hallucination, and or mischief. Myths and fiction lend to us influential source materials in our susceptible human brains. And I confess that's what I was doing 8 to 10 years ago when I first heard of such reports. You might right now be thinking similarly and say to yourself, stronger intellects need not concern themselves with such fantastical notions. However, the topic in question when discussed and contemplated strikes very much to our own identities, evolution, theology, and indeed mortality. Wolfman legends extend back through time and can be found coming from all around the world, even before the supposed advent of the broad sharing of history and literature between civilizations, which had vastly different cultures and languages. When we allow ourselves to consider such sightings and allow for the possibility that these creatures more than just exist, but may be lurking in the shadows of the fields and woodlands around us, we may also, intentionally or not, then reflect on our own origins, purpose and beliefs. And as these legends seem to stretch back to early or prehistory, we can intertwine our contemplation with another line of myths and stories, which occasionally weave connections in both time and geography to various recorded creation stories from the earliest civilizations around the world. And so, our contemplation then may become intertwined with that other question: where do we come from? The combative themes of stories recorded by early civilizations are curiously similar in many regards. Very often in those legends, the world is founded after a struggle between opposing factions, be they gods, demigods, titans, Anunnaki, or some other seemingly higher or advanced beings. In any case, the world is said to be founded out of some dualistic situation and the defeated force portrayed as the cause of chaos. It is from these stories a wide host of paranormal beings may ultimately be supposed to have originally descended. And so, for some to whom those recorded creation stories and or established religions is hokey, the legend can still safely endure. But for you, the Dogman or the Wolfman is an uncategorized cryptid that humans have yet to safely observe and study. These creatures might also be considered in psychological terms as a representation in our minds of baser instincts, or a desire to be someone we are not. For others, who are perfectly reasonable and understand the world still works to rules and laws, the shape-shifting and or curse elements of the legend lend just enough magic to accord with their additional perceptions that despite those rules and laws, there is a great deal out there that modern society just doesn't understand. Whether that be knowledge not yet learned, or if it be knowledge lost to the passing of time and into folklore and legend. Theological philosophers of many centuries past dedicated time to pondering if the cynocephaly were descendants of Adam, and thus capable or eligible for salvation. They seem to have deduced that they were, perhaps thanks in part to their acceptance of St. Christopher, who by some accounts was a dog-headed man, and has been depicted as such in artwork. And in this lends to a line of thinking and an even more terrifying prospect. That these beings are here in accordance with those creation legends, both from historical records and the established world religions. These glimpses and sightings of the grizzled man-wolf are confirmation, perhaps, that the soldiers of the enemy and their dogs of war are assembled in the shadows and waiting for their deployment orders. The chances are we are a long way off having any great leap in our understanding in the near future. After all, for most sane people it doesn't matter which of these is likely to be true, for I know of no person of sound mind who would willfully enter the woods in response to a werewolf sighting and saunter up to one of these creatures in an effort to be the first to verify its existence. After all, would you? If you've enjoyed this video, please click the like button. Why not leave me a comment down below and let me know what you think is behind sightings like these and what you think might be the nature of their existence. And why not also give this video a share on social media and ask your friends and family what they think about these accounts. If you are new here, please also click the subscribe button and turn on all notifications so that you can receive notifications the next time a regularly scheduled episode goes up on the UK Paranormal Files channel. As always, all that's left for me to say is, thanks very much for watching.